What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, yesterday we had a bunch of information come out from Nintendo around sales figures for their Switch and games for the system, which will go over all the updates for different games like Tears of the Kingdom and Super Mario Bros. Wonder here today. Also, we are going to be talking about some comments from the president of Nintendo as they head into 2024, exactly what they're relying on when it comes to the hardware front, and we'll also be going over this Xbox situation that continues to mount online to the point where it's getting a bit weird, and we're even discussing the idea of new hardware from Xbox, but not exactly what you would expect. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton, and if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. We're gonna start today with Xbox Game Pass for the month of February, as we have a bunch of games that have been revealed heading to the service actually in the next week or so. We can see this though posted up over on news.xbox.com. Nice card at the top showing off all of the different games. Now available now is, I'm gonna say Anna Card or Anna Chart, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that one. That's cloud, console, and PC. Moving up to today, February 7th, we have Train Sim World 4, cloud, console, and PC. Moving to tomorrow, February 8th, Madden NFL 24, console and PC, this through way of EA Play. So if you want to play a couple games in Madden heading up to the Super Bowl, you can technically use the newest one here with 24 in Game Pass. Then we have Resident Evil 3 cloud, console, and PC on February 13th. Good to see this on the heels of Resident Evil 2 Remake that just recently went into the service. Good game there. And then Bloodstained Ritual of the Night on February 14th, cloud, console, and PC. Another good one there for the service. We have A Little to the Left, cloud, console, and PC on February 15th, along with Plate Up, cloud, console, and PC. And rounding things out on February 20th, we have Return to Grace, cloud, console, and PC. They also have a reminder here that MLB The Show 24 will be going into Game Pass. This, of course, happening next month, so I'm sure we'll go over a list of games when that happens just to do an updated look there. But pretty good, I'd say, for the next 7 to 10 days here for Game Pass. Definitely some big-time titles to check out, especially with something like Resident Evil 3. Also, speaking of Capcom, they have a survey that's currently out there, and I'll bring these up from time to time, just in case people wanted to check a couple of games that they would like to see remakes or sequels of, and there are some in here that fans have been requesting for quite some time, which we can see this is posted up over on Nintendo Life. They also have the link to the survey here, but Capcom has asked about sequels or spin-offs for certain games like Dino Crisis, Okami, Onimusha, Dead Rising, Darkstalkers, Breath of Fire, Mega Man, Ghosts and Goblins, and also for when it comes to remakes with current or modern technology, they have like specific titles, Mega Man 1, 2, and 3. That would be interesting to see them go back and redo some of the older Mega Man games, maybe in the RE engine, like we saw with Ghosts and Goblins. That would be interesting to see that one. Onimusha 1, 2, and 3, Commando, Rival Schools, Final Fight, Gargoyles Quest 1 and 2, Breath of Fire 1 and 2. The list really goes on and on and on here. So again, just wanted to bring that to your attention in case you wanted to go in and vote for a couple of games. I don't know if this means they're going to really do any of this, but it's definitely data that they're at least paying attention to enough to, well, go out there and ask in a survey. Oh, and after that recent showing for Avowed, there was one criticism when it came to the combat, that being it didn't look very impactful as they were fighting off different monsters in that world. Well, it appears that the developers have at least paid attention and heard some of the feedback. We can see this is posted up and transcribed over on IGN. This pulling from the Dropped Frames podcast. They say we're getting to show more and more, but all of that is while the game is still in progress, obviously. One of the heartening things has been fans call out some of the things that we are actively working on, like the sense of hitting and impacts as you're attacking enemies. It's like, yep, what you all saw was still a few weeks behind where we were, even when that footage was released, just because of the nature of the way these things are put together, and the team's been working on it. That's one of the reasons, obviously, is, by the way, the game director for Avowed. This is obviously why they say like early footage, not necessarily representative of the final product. In this case, I guess they also felt the lack of impact in combat, and we'll maybe see another showing for it later on this year as they work towards apparently it releasing maybe in the fall or holiday. I'm thinking for this one maybe a nice November release, as apparently Indiana Jones is currently targeting December based on recent reports, but we'll wait and see how the combat looks maybe in a couple of months. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo's financials that they revealed yesterday. This was for Q3, so that would cover the holiday season, October, November, and December. And we've kind of been watching along with the Switch to see if it would be able to overtake the PlayStation 2 and the DS and sit atop the list of the best-selling games or game systems of all time, because it does kind of feel like it's on that crash course right now, just based on Nintendo's own forecast that we've seen and its current place right now in the market. Well, we can actually see this posted up over on their Nintendo Investors Relations page, and the Switch currently sitting at 139.36 million pieces of hardware sold. Now that means that they sold 6.9 million over this recent holiday season. And while the hardware is declining year over year, as you would expect in terms of raw units sold, Nintendo is actually making more money technically at this time when you compare to the previous 3 quarters of the last fiscal year. So this is around the time where obviously you're able to sell subscriptions, DLC, software at a pretty solid rate, just because you've built up this large, nearly 140 million unit install base. Now on the software side, they are at 1.2 billion pieces of software, which is absolutely ridiculous. I said it was a big deal for them to get over 1 billion units of software this generation. Now they're 200 million over that even. So at this point, there's a chance they could sell another couple hundred million and actually eclipse the entirety of their console generations previous to the Wii. So think of the GameCube, the Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, or the Famicom. You add all the software up there, and that's like 1.3.5 billion or so, which is, again, think about that with just one generation from Nintendo here. Now, their forecast has moved up for this current fiscal year from 15 million up to 15.5 million pieces of hardware. Their software has also moved up to 190 million because, well, they're selling Switches maybe faster than they were originally thinking for this current fiscal year. To go along with some of these updated numbers on their website, they did release a very comprehensive PDF going over some of the highlights from the past 3 quarters, and that does include Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which so far this fiscal year has sold 6.79 million copies. In fact, over this holiday season, 3.57 million alone. Now, I will say the game was bundled in with the Switch. Remember, we had that entire special that they were running, so I'm sure that boosted sales a bit, but now the game has eclipsed 60 million sold, which is just mind-blowing stuff there. Again, we can also scroll down some of their best-selling games so far on their website, but like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, now over 20 million sold. But I will admit, it is kind of flattening out somewhat. It's 780,000 sold during the holiday season, and Breath of the Wild wasn't too far behind it by about 300,000 copies, so it might be starting to fall in line with what Breath of the Wild sells even each quarter now going forward. We'll keep an eye on that. Probably the big highlight here, though, was Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Nearly 12 million copies were sold in, which again means Nintendo gets their money for it. They've sent it off to retailers, but that is the fastest selling Mario game to date. And this would have been in, what, like 2 months or so, right? Because it came out towards the end of October. So absolutely ridiculous stuff there. It goes to show that, yes, the Mario movie has obviously boosted just the Mario intellectual property even more, which is hard to believe because Mario obviously was very, very popular, but now more popular in the mainstream eyes. And even Super Mario RPG, 3.14 million copies sold, which has already now outsold the Super Nintendo original. Some other interesting highlights here. Nintendo says they now have 122 million annual players. So yeah, they are also tracking like monthly active users, that sort of thing. But 122 million is quite a bit for them. 24 titles have sold at least 1 million copies in this fiscal year so far. And Nintendo's digital sales now account for 48% of their total sales on the Switch. So you are seeing digital sales versus physical, even for Nintendo, is getting close to that 50-50 mark. I do want to point out, though, that the reason it kind of boosted up from the previous quarter, DLC for Pokemon, and just an overall revenue spike for Nintendo Switch Online with increased sales this quarter. That tends to happen when you sell more Switches, obviously, for the holiday. People also buy in for like a year of NSO, maybe for the N64 tier. And at the bottom of all this, Metroid Prime 4 is still to be announced. But as expected, Nintendo continues to roll along with their current Switch, even completing its 7th year here pretty soon in March. I mean, it's just doing incredible numbers for the age of the platform. And it does appear that even if we have the next system come out at the end of this year, I think this current system will still continue to sell millions of systems here and there and eventually overtake the PS2 and the DS. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was able to reach the heights of 160 million consoles sold. But speaking of Nintendo's next hardware, we did have, well, an update from President Furukawa at Nintendo about what their plans are going into 2024. We can see this posted up. This over on Bloomberg from Takashi Machizuki, as Nintendo's president Shintaro Furukawa did have a conference call after the earnings report. This is what they said. The existing Switch will be Nintendo's main business heading into 2024. The company's plan for the next fiscal year will be shared at its next earnings briefing, he added. So this is very important, as obviously the Switch going into 2024, yes, that is their main business because that's the only system they officially have announced and out there on the market right now, sure. And they have some games coming up, as they outlined in that comprehensive PDF with things like Princess Peach Showtime. But they still want to sell enough systems to meet their forecast that will run up at the end of March. But they say they're going to share their new forecast at their next investors briefing, which would be like the first 10 days of May, somewhere in there. And I think that will be after they've at least unveiled their new system to some degree, whether that's through a trailer or just a formal announcement, even a full event. And then they would, of course, share their forecast as to where they think both the current Switch will be and their next system when it runs through the holiday season. And then to go a bit further, was mentioned that he also declined to comment on anything else outside of their current system. So I still think we're looking at March at the earliest to, again, round out their fiscal year before they say anything, just to get their next fiscal year kicked off correctly and get things moving along for the release of their next system, which it'll be really difficult to not talk about at their next investors briefing because they're going to outline the entire year. And if they have a large spike in console sales that they're expecting, I wonder where that's going to come from. Next up, let's talk about some big changes coming to Square Enix, as it appears they're looking to reform their overall development process internally, and most likely to avoid any big costly mistakes like Forspoken, which didn't do well. I know people are kind of looking at this again after all the updates that have happened and been like, okay, this game wasn't that bad, or at least as bad as it was being made out to be when it first released, but didn't sell very well, to the point where the studio that created it within Square Enix kind of got dissolved and everyone sort of went into different departments. But we can see this posted up. This over on Gamatsu, and again, this is from the CEO at Square Enix, the new CEO, Takashi Kiryu, says, "We are performing a zero-base review to determine what kind of organizational structure is necessary to realize the contents of our pipeline and which approach is best." Now, we're expecting them to really go in depth as to what their new structure will be in the spring, and we know that they've divided up more so than before some of their internal studios. They even mention outside sources coming in and being able to invest in specific studios and areas. But I think what this is really talking about is the idea of these games becoming very, very expensive to the point where you can't really have a lot of missteps anymore. Before, you could kind of get away with it. Sure, you'd have to eat the cost of some of these games, but if it was like 20 or 30 million, all right, we can make that work. But now it's like hundreds of millions of dollars for some of these projects, 7, 8 years even at times. And I think Square, what they're trying to do here is reform to the point where they can catch some of the lower quality efforts well ahead of time, or just ones that they focus group and realize, okay, this isn't necessarily a concept that is going to catch on well out of the gate, because expectations keep going up. And I think Square is thinking more along the lines of 10 million sold for some of their big intellectual properties, as opposed to, okay, we sold 5, we're good. Again, these games are getting expensive. They need to make sure they have home runs basically every time they come up to the plate now. And that's one of the reasons you are seeing the partnerships they have right now with Sony, because that does alleviate some of the risk with big titles like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and we also see them getting pretty comfortable with Microsoft. They're looking any way they can to just try to pull some of the expenses down on their end for some of the development. But they have mentioned that they want to focus more on the high-quality, big-budget style games rather than do a bunch of smaller titles. And maybe that's so that they can work out their release schedule, because for a while there, especially at the end of last year, what happened was they just put out all these games almost scattershot style in 2022. And there were just too many games coming out, and it kind of overlapped, and you had Tactics Ogre getting pressed on by Star Ocean, and then there was Diofield Chronicle that a lot of people didn't even know came out, so it wasn't great. But if they can work all that out, even if they do move to these larger, big budget games, if they get things figured out internally, they certainly have the intellectual properties and technically then the pipeline to get it done. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a very odd situation here with Microsoft that we see unfolding now. And yeah, things have gotten a bit weird, we'll say, with the fan base online around Xbox and these games that are exclusive now, potentially going to other platforms. Again, we've covered it in length now at this point, but all eyes are on next week when apparently Phil Spencer and just the Xbox branch is going to address all of this and give us an idea as to the future and the vision for Xbox going forward. Well, part of this has to do, obviously, with hardware. Will they continue making consoles? Because if they're able to find success elsewhere, do they really need the console anymore? Well, it appears that Microsoft is indeed working on new plans for hardware. Apparently, they're greenlighting a bunch of different projects, and this came up, as we can see this over on Windows Central. In this piece that Jez Corden had written up, an Xbox handheld isn't just likely for Microsoft, it's absolutely necessary. And in this report, Jez does mention that there are a bunch of hardware projects that have recently been greenlit within Microsoft for really gaming. And then as that was going on, a lot of people started discussing the idea of a Switch-like handheld from Xbox. In fact, this really blew up online yesterday, and I was trying to figure out where it came from, but there are many reports that kind of source this. For example, we have Altchar here says Xbox community member Mag allegedly has insight into Xbox's plans for the future, revealing that Xbox is still planning to release a next-gen console. I do believe that Xbox is at least going to have another generation, so all right, that works. And the next-gen Xbox launch will reportedly include 2 SKUs, traditional high-end console, and a Switch-like dockable handheld. Okay, well, you know, I mentioned this. I was talking to a couple of people just offline, just going back and forth about what's going on with Xbox now. Kind of what I expect next week, which I think this is being built up into this massive event, and it's going to be a press release, and they're going to say, hey, look, like 3 or 4 games are going to other platforms right now, and we might explore this more with even larger titles. So like Sea of Thieves, Hi-Fi Rush, I feel like those will be announced then and there, and it's like, yeah, they're going to PlayStation, and we'll see about other stuff in the future. But with all the concerns around hardware right now just existing for Microsoft, maybe you mention something new on the hardware front, or at least say, hey, we're not leaving hardware. In fact, we're going to the next generation in a couple of years, and maybe the Switch-like handheld along with a high-powered device that all plays the same games, right? So you have your home console that does 4K, 120, or what have you, and then the dockable Switch-like device that really provides that convenience would at least be enough to make it interesting in the sense that it's not just a box and you're trying to figure out why do you own this thing if games are elsewhere. Well, I mean, the convenience of an Xbox handheld would at least play into the idea of, okay, it makes sense to own that because I can't necessarily do what I'm doing here at that level elsewhere, especially with things like Xbox Play Anywhere. That's a really cool thing to have the ROG Ally for. The Steam Deck is still a little weird with that because, of course, it heavily relies on Steam out of the box. You got to dual boot and do all this stuff. But if Microsoft had a handheld as well as a console that could have these saves go back and forth and get a relatively similar experience, I think it would make sense for Microsoft to stick around in the hardware game, even if their games are at some point just everywhere. Something interesting to think about. I don't necessarily know if this is something we can expect in 2026 or 2027, but again, we'll find out more from Phil Spencer next week. However, I will tell you, I think this event is going to be built up quite a bit, and it's going to be kind of business as usual with a pretty standard press release that I'm sure we'll be going over here the next day. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're gonna take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, if Microsoft starts moving their big games to other platforms through timed exclusive launches for the Xbox and PC first, where would you play them? Okay, day one on PC, 28%, 20% day one on Xbox, but then 52% say they'll wait for it to come to PS5 or Switch or wherever else Microsoft decides to put them. And I do think it comes down to the title itself, depending on what Microsoft announces. If it's like an older title that people have been waiting to see some sort of revival for, I mean, I think they'll be there day one. If they showed up and they were like, hey, Lost Odyssey's coming back, it's a new entry in the series, I'd be all over that day one and I'd figure out how to play it, whether it's on Xbox or PC. But I guess there are some who just have a PS5 or have a Switch and they're like, yeah, it's whenever it shows up, it shows up. But for me, it's like, if the game is something I've been waiting for, I'm there, I'll figure it out. And I guess that's how Microsoft is going to play things, and at least hope that that is enough to pull people into their ecosystem right away. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Base, who says, when Starfield was announced, I remember them being suspiciously vague about the exclusivity of future Bethesda games. Well, yes, but I think really the big one here that people are pointing to is Blade. And now we're looking at it like, oh, okay, maybe that's why they didn't have the Xbox branding all over this thing, because even they didn't know, one, if it's going to be on the current Xbox, since I think Blade is still well off in the distance, but two, they might not know if it's going to end up on PlayStation day one at this rate, right? So that's something we're still in limbo waiting to hear from Microsoft, but that trailer makes a bit more sense now, doesn't it? But, well, I mean, we also saw the stuff from Marvel's End when it came to the Insomniac leaks and how much money they were asking for Spider-Man, and they had like a minimum number of that had to be sold for them to continue working with Sony, and you factor that into Microsoft maybe realizing that games aren't selling at the clip that they wanted it to next to Game Pass, and a lot of stuff up in the air to figure out on their end. But again, I guess we'll find out next week when Phil Spencer's ready to talk. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Where's the Switch rolling up now to 140 million units sold? Do you think when it's all said and done, it'll end up sitting at the top as the best-selling game console of all time? And then also, what about some of Nintendo's comments on hardware going into 2024? Do you think they're just about ready to start talking about next gen? And would you be interested in a Switch-like Xbox device to kick off their next generation, maybe in 2026 or 2027? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.